We got our first participants joining in. Welcome, everyone. This is our Ultra Live webinar, and we got next to me here Dr. Clarence Tam, ready to enlighten us all with some of her knowledge. Clarence, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing? It's like we haven't spoken in forever, but I'm glad you're here with me.
It feels like we're just next to each other, right? We're both at Ultra, then virtually.
I love Utah. I love Utah. How come I didn't see you on my way in? Like,
there we go. We just have a certain Tasman Sea between us here. So Dr. Tam is talking to us straight from Auckland, New Zealand. And it is 9 p.m. for you there, 7 p.m. for me here.
Yes.
And to our guests, we invite you to leave your comments as well. And we have a Q&A session as well that you can leave your questions here, and Dr. Tam will answer them for you. Do let us know in the comments where you're from as well. We always are very curious to know about that, and we love, again, to see where our message is reaching. And as we get prepared here, so once again, this is our Ultra Live webinar, and our topic today is multi-disciplinary, I should say. Our title is Chasing Nature, Techniques for Ultimate Biomimicry. And is that a made-up word, Clarence?
Totally. Haven't you seen it in the Oxford Dictionary? It's something.
I haven't checked.
The recent edition from Ultradent. It's called Ultramate. So.
Okay, all right. So this will be, it's such an exclusive presentation that even the title of it has its own customized word for it. All right, so as you get settled in, make sure you get your cup of tea or your snack, or make sure you're comfortable. We're in for a nice ride here. And I really don't want to delay much and get us started so we can really benefit from this. Let me just do a quick introduction, Clarence. For those who don't know, Clarence has a very loyal following. So maybe all of you already know her, but if in case there's someone that hasn't had the pleasure of meeting her yet, Dr. Clarence Tam is originally from Canada. And this is where she got her doctorate degree in dental surgery at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. And she also completed her general practice residency in pediatric dentistry at the University of Toronto. She has a private practice where she has a focus on restorative and cosmetic dentistry. And Dr. Tam is well published in both domestic and in New Zealand and international dental press. She writes articles, reviews submissions, and even helps develop prototype products and techniques in clinical dentistry. Clarence is a key opinion leader and international lecturer when traveling allows. She's usually doing some traveling and talking to different audiences in different parts of the world. And she is the immediate past chairperson and director of the New Zealand Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry. She is a board certified accredited member of the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, being just one of two of those here in Australasia, between Australia and New Zealand. And she maintains a fellowship status with the International Academy for Dental Facial Aesthetics. And also, again, it's in sync with everything that she does beyond dentistry. She is a part of Smiles for the Pacific, also related to dentistry, but this is an educational trust and charity that aims to expand professional dentistry services across the entire South Pacific region. So she's involved in the Delta Gamma sorority, and which aims to spearhead projects harmonious with service for sites in the South Pacific. I'd love to hear some more about that as well as we move along, Clarence. But let's get started on some dentistry and maybe some optics, glasses subjects.
Good. Yeah, I just want to test our poll, Yeah, so take it away. Which option do attendees like? Do you want a clear option of the glasses tonight to make it interactive during this mukbang? Or do you want the dark ones? So first
the
off,
votes are coming in.
Votes are coming in, okay? And I'm gonna, that's the only option available for
I think we need to see the light one again, although the light one has
all right.
winning by a landslide so far. Oh, okay. So that's the light one.
The light one, and then we got the dark one going on.
All right, so let's let that go for 7 more seconds. If you haven't voted yet. 2, 1, there you go. So this is just basically to test to see that our polling system is working here. So it's the light one, Dr. Tam. We have a winner, 75% of the votes.
All right, that's all sweet. I got it. I'm all over it. Perfect. Oh yeah, it's landslide. I love it.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
All right, they're all yours.
Wonderful. Fabio, thank you so much. I hope that after lockdown, I have the opportunity to finally come over and meet you in Sydney. So I heard a lot about you. Fabio is one of the guys that I've wanted to meet. Introduced by Raphael Biolchi.
Good, Biolchi, yes.
Biolchi, and you know, he's got an MBA. It's something I've always wanted to get as well. And you know, so Fabio really is kind of the man in terms of you know, and he has like some accolades that I want to experience in the future as well. So like an MBA definitely is essential to reinventing how we are in the dental industry. So that's really, really cool. I want to thank Ultradent for their strong support of me, my practice, and also like sculpting school as well. And yeah, like I can't wait to work with you guys more. It's really true what they say about Ultradent. It's not, you know, yeah, like I'll be talking about some Ultradent products today, but a lot of the products are not Ultradent. It's important to understand that you pick and choose whatever works best in your hands clinically for the best clinical outcomes for our practices. So the reason I like Ultradent is because they're just as obsessive about detail as I am. And from a culture standpoint, they're just like a family. So if you've ever been to Utah, the way that Dan Fisher is, the way that Ashley Stanford is, the way that Melanie is, they're amazing. They open their arms and they welcome you to their home. You can use their bathroom and you're like, this is the bathroom that Dr. Fisher uses, or this is the garage where he invented Ultra Etch. This is insane. And you touch it and instantly you're inspired for a million years, you know? So it's like really, really cool. So it's an honor to work with you guys. And without further ado, we'll kick it off. It's gonna be pretty free form today. What I mean by that is if you guys have questions, just drop it in the Q&A. Fabio will interrupt if he thinks it's like kind of like, you know, it's the right time to do so. We're going to go for a solid hour today. And, you know, chances are there's going to be enough content in this particular lecture for yet another hour, I'm sure. But yeah, we'll see how we go. And most important thing is to have fun. You know, I know you guys are probably right now, what do you have in front of you? Some ramen? You know, you got some, you know, tonkatsu ramen, you know, with some tasio or something and just like egg on top. It's like a mukbang. Next time I should actually have some food in front of me and actually, you know, be doing this lecture really, really chilled out, informal styles with you guys. But definitely enjoy yourselves. And I hope that more than anything, you can take some tips and tricks back to your practice for tomorrow morning or Monday morning if you're skipping the rest of the week for whatever reason. And yeah, the important thing is if I can help you kind of improve any sort of aspect of your clinical outcomes, then my job here is done, you know. So I'm very much, I don't know everything, you know, I'm very much a learner and I love absorbing knowledge. And so I'm never too good to learn something. So I might stand corrected by some of your comments or some of your experiences today as well. And I'm more than happy to kind of learn from you guys because I feel like together collectively, this is why we're here. You know, it's to help each other kind of lift the bar of dentistry. So very flattered that I can do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump on to this this presentation. The second slide's got this talking cartoon. You're going to like it. The third slide has got this like video, and the video is going to have some music, and you'll be like, oh man, it's choppy. I can't. Oh, it's in and out. It's like really abbreviated. I don't want you to freak out. Just enjoy it. You know, there's not too many videos in this situation. And of course, with the internet being the way it is, with everyone kind of at home and stuff like that in the world, our bandwidth is going to be well and truly saturated. So without further ado, I'll share my screen and then we'll kick it off. I hope I share the right one, you know. All right, cool. You guys can still see me, which is real cool. I'm just going to play this right here. All right, so the reason why I named it Chasing Nature is because ultimately that's what we're doing. You know, the title of a lot of my posts are, you know, just like constantly chasing nature, because nature is infinite. I don't know if you guys know, but well, you guys can appreciate the beauty of nature. Recently, well, as recent as 3 years ago, I got my dog.
Hi guys.
Sorry. And my dog's name is Arnie, and Arnie is a French bulldog. And so my life has changed from going to bars and restaurants to dog parks and talking to people about their pets who I don't really care about. But, you know, if you're bored, you're walking along, you pluck a leaf off a tree, you look at the intaglio surface of the leaf, and you're like, oh wow, look at these veins, they're so cool. You got the main trunk of like the leaf branch, and it kind of branches off, and you're like, that's cool. And then let's see where it branches off again. Ooh, interesting. Is that golden proportion? You start to see, like, you know, elements that you want to see in nature and try to decipher its beauty. And yet, no matter how much humans try to quantify this, it's hard for them to actually capture the essence that is nature. So in my office at work, I've got this giant 42-inch monitor in front of me, and I'm like literally sitting 2 feet away from it. So when I pop my work up on that, it's truly humbling, because you see all the weirdness or all the defects that you want to change and things that you would do differently next time. So for me, photography really, really is a way to improve. So if you guys don't have a camera, if you haven't been taking photographs already, I really encourage you to do that, because it'll really transform your game and lift your standard. All right, so the name of this is Chasing Nature, Ultimate Biomimicry, obviously ultimate, but ultimate. So,
hi guys, good morning. Welcome to Game of Clones. Before we start, just a little bit of a disclaimer. So all the photographs you'll see in this lecture are my own, all right? They're completely unaltered. I don't really know how to use Photoshop at all. Also, just a note about financial compensation. I am paid a nominal honorarium for this lecture and maybe a hotel room and some meals, but besides that, I don't get paid to endorse any particular product, and I don't receive any financial compensation from sale of products. If you guys feel like taking photographs, feel free to do so, except for the full face versions, all right, if there are some in there. And this is to be used for your personal use. Those people who want to use it for professional use, please try to refrain from doing so. Otherwise, I, the red monster, might have to come after you, and then it's no fun for anybody. So enjoy yourself. Hope you guys take some tips and tricks back to the practice to be used on Monday morning, and I will see you at the end. Thank you very much.
All right, so this is the red monster. If you guys aren't familiar with the Adobe Creative Cloud, this is called Character Animator. If you guys have kids, download this. You can draw your own character in Adobe Illustrator as a vector file, and you can actually create a whole 2D image, and you can use biometrics to link it to your face. So you can assign, for example, your right eyebrow to its right eyebrow, your right cheek to its right cheek, your smile to its smile, and when you move, it moves. So it's an example of how digital technology has really come to the fore in terms of animation. Because if you guys remember Matt Groening and The Simpsons back in the day, Homer Simpson running after Bart Simpson, wanting to throttle his neck, chasing after him, those 3 hairs on his bald head flapping in the breeze. They used to draw that. Matt used to draw that frame by frame, but these days, you don't have to do that anymore. Essentially, digital technology does it. So you just use a character, and the character might move around, and it does what it does, and it's wonderful. So in the same way, digital technology has really transformed smile design as well, and dentistry in terms of predictability. We're able to try and cross-arch implant frameworks, you know, without secondary steps, with extreme precision, which is fantastic. So very excited to watch this space and see what the next IDS has to offer in Cologne and things like that, because it really is transformative, and it has been such a wave that we're riding so far. So yeah. All right, awesome. So obviously I'm the director. Good for me. So pretty much that's what we're doing, transforming lives one smile at a time. It's my slogan, my motto for the practice, and it's true. I mean, every single detail is definitive in our recreation of what's missing in a patient's head, what's missing in a patient's smile. It's important to really appreciate the whole picture, a global sense of who they are, whether it's kind of the mesial buccal cusp of an upper six or something like that. It all matters. All those secondary fissures, that triangular ridge. It matters because you're spending time in your dental chair, away from your family, away from your pets. You know, you're spending time there. You might as well infuse your heart and soul, your emotion into every single thing that you do without reservation. Because otherwise, why are we there? Put your signature on every single thing that you do. And it'll change your life and that of other people's. And it'll differentiate yourselves from the practice down the road. So this is a picture I took in the Dominican Republic. It's in nature. Even if you wanted to create a bird, is this something that you would create? Such a beautiful bird, this peacock. Look at the density of those spots and how it kind of increases in density as you get to the core. It's amazing, it's insane. And so when I take a look at inspiration for posterior layering, for example, in Albert Park in Auckland, you've got these really big, old, exotic trees with folds and undulations, and you can find inspiration for your work in nature. So whenever you feel empty or dry, look to nature for that drink, and you'll be filled up again. All right, let's kick it off with a case straight up. So this is a situation that we find ourselves in day out. You got class 5, non-carious cervical lesions. Where do they come from? Why are they there? Is abfraction a real thing? Is it just abrasion because the patient's got muscles? This is a little Japanese woman. You know, she did this to herself. She tells me she used a soft brush. I don't believe it for a second. But before you judge her, you want to make sure and check her occlusion and make sure indeed whether or not there are extreme lateral forces or interfering forces within the envelope of function. This is really critical. And if I were to tell you that this is a class 1 Kennedy situation where you got a bilateral free-end extension, how are you going to restore this type of thing, even if it was abfraction? Obviously, you know, possibly equilibration or deprogramming to some extent is necessary in order to find out exactly why this happened, but it's not so much an attrition force that has caused this, obviously, and it's not so much abfraction. Most likely it is abrasion. You know, she might be little, but she's strong, and she definitely wants clean teeth, but she's cleaned all the enamel and some of the dentin, clean off the cervical aspect of her teeth. So how do you isolate this in real life, right? And does it actually make a difference? Because there's studies that show, for example, in 2013, the Journal of Adhesive Dentistry, Dalt et al. Found that, hey, it doesn't actually matter whether or not you use a rubber dam or not in class 5 lesions. What did they test? Cotton roll, they tested rubber dam, they tested total etch, they tested self-etch. What was the defining factor in failure? In failure, where there was marginal failure after a year, it was when they used a self-etch technique with cotton roll isolation. So maybe that's 2 no-nos. 2 no-nos don't make a right. So they found that if you're able to prepare the enamel correctly, you know, the level of survivability long-term for these class 5s anyway was not a significant situation. But it doesn't mean that we should ignore that and say, let's just cotton roll that. You use rubber dam whenever you can. So my question is, how would you use rubber dam in this situation, and can you? I mean, what are you going to clamp? What's your distal tooth? Maybe you got to build that up first, possibly before you put a clamp. What clamp are you going to use? Can you use that brinker and things like that? And how much time have you got for your particular appointment? Sometimes you find that the clamp that you use doesn't adapt to the cervical aspect or the radicular aspect that well. In that case, you're kind of like, you got some compromise. You might have an underhang, which is very frustrating because afterwards you take off the rubber dam, you're like, oh man, you know, I've got to, okay, give me some cord, you know, we're going to micro-aerobrate again, and we're going to kind of like, you know, try to do this. So restoration of these class 5s is certainly challenging. All right. So the question to ask, is it abrasion, is it abfraction? And always check your occlusion at the end of a class 5 restoration, even if it's like an upper, because even if it's on the upper, if you have significant lateral forces on the tooth, there is flexure. and that'll expedite the demise of your restoration. So it's important that you consider that as well. And you reduce any lateral excursive interferences posteriorly, because teeth were never meant to be loaded laterally posteriorly. Sometimes we've adapted, we've got group function, but that's just the way it is. But ideally, you want dots in the back, streaks in the front, because the front teeth are used to guide the disclusion of the back teeth. So in this situation here, we're using a 00 ultra pack cord here. It stays really, really well in place. You notice here, I'm not soaking it. Why not? How many of you guys would actually soak it? Why don't you just like maybe comment below? I mean, or maybe Fabio can create a poll while I'm talking and stuff like that. I'm curious. How many of you guys would actually soak your cord right now? You're thinking, yeah, I'm just gonna soak it. I'm gonna soak it in some viscostat clear or some aluminum chloride. Like, why not, right? You know, you're thinking, I wanna minimize bleeding. I wanna minimize all that stuff. Well, the main problem is that aluminum chloride creates an insoluble precipitate on the surface of the tooth, on the dentin, because it's acidic. It's acidic. And you're thinking, well, who cares? Who cares? Because I'm just gonna etch, and that should bring back bonding levels to exactly that of control. Is it true? It's not true. And I'll tell you more about that as we go on. But needless to say, we're gonna pack dry, because etching does not reverse the negative effects of aluminum chloride on exposed dentin. Interesting. You can see how we're gonna create a long bevel. And what's a long bevel or an infinity bevel? As taught by Newton Fall, it's a 60-degree bevel on the facial, not 45 degrees on the bevel, 60 degrees, a little bit longer, just past the DEJ. And then as that bevel hits the surface of the tooth, you've got that join line, if you will. And that sharp edge should be rounded off to infinity. And you can use a burr, you can use a soft flex disc. Essentially, you're increasing your surface area not only for bonding, but also for blending, okay? Cervically, you've got a sharp cavo surface margin as well. You should be rounding that off with the tip of your burr if possible. What we're trying to prevent is white line fever, which is essentially the ripping of enamel rods away from the composite due to polymerization, contraction forces. So again, you're thinking, man, okay, I definitely want to use a material perhaps that has low shrinkage stress. I don't want something that's going to shrink really, really hard. And I certainly don't want to be crazy and use something in too large an increment, because that force is almost certainly going to rip the interface away from the dentin, and I won't have a hybrid layer, and chances are I'll have leakage and post-op sensitivity. So these are considerations. So class 5 isolation is real life. I mean, the thing is, you might choose to do the first premolar first, then actually put a modified clamp on that tooth. And then you might want to do these individually. What I like to do, however, I like to do them two or three at a time, depending on if they're in lower incisors, they're dinky. Have you seen how big the velo grande is? It's as big as my house. My house is, it's small, but it's not that. Anyways, whatever. You know what I mean? The velo grande is massive. You know, it can cure your whole mouth. It can't, but you know what I mean? It's massive. So you can cure multiple teeth at the same time, and you can expedite your layering. So kind of the workflow for adhesion in this situation is I'm always going to be using microabrasion. Why? Why? How many of you guys have got flowers for Valentine's Day? It was in February, right? Was it lockdown? It wasn't lockdown. You got flowers. How much are flowers in Sydney? Let's just say 20 bucks each. And let's just say you're like a real prissy individual, so you didn't just get a dozen, you got 3 dozen. Wow, that's a lot of flowers. That's a lot of money. Why don't you tell your partner next year, you know what, hon, save your money. Don't save it, actually. Get me a microabrasion unit, because I'm going to be that much happier for it. I'm going to come back a happier clinician with better clinical outcomes, and then I'm going to be happier, and we're going to make more babies. You're not. It's going to be hopefully not an accident, but you know what I mean. You'll be in a happier state of mind. So you're going to increase your surface area for bonding, okay, by 3-fold, just by blasting this on the surface of the tooth. You're also going to eliminate any insoluble precipitate caused by your viscostat clear in a heartbeat just by doing that. What about when you take off your provisional crown or your provisional veneers? What do? Do you pumice the surface? Is that good enough? Why don't you use microabrasion? It simplifies things. Without changing the topography of your preparation, it strips it back down to naked, perfect, clean ready to bond to surface. All right, so this is always the first step in creating a clean surface for predictable bonding. Next, what you're gonna do, you can see here, there's a number of substrates exposed, right? You got this dentin that's like really, really deep, and it's peripulpal, it's like super close, even though she doesn't have sensitivity. You know it's just a hair away. You're gonna be etching, and I like to selectively etch the enamel for roughly 10 seconds, then splash it onto dentin for roughly around 10 seconds or so, all right? Then rinse it off. If I'm feeling like I really want to use more of a selective etch thing, and the reason why is because we're all conditioned to think that, hey, look, you know, there's some sort of contaminant. I don't trust the bond enough to completely let a self-etch function take over here. I want to use a bit of detergent on the surface just to make sure it's clean psychologically. But what am I cognizant of? I'm cognizant that at the deepest part of this dentin here, how stiff is that hydroxyapatite? It's 16 gigapascals. It's 16 gigapascals. What happens when I throw blue etch on there? In a heartbeat, you're going to decrease that amount of crystallization, and you're going to increase the flexiness of the dentinal collagen fibrils that were once coated by HA, but now you've dropped the flexural modulus from 16 GPa to 3 GPa in a heartbeat. So try to limit, especially in deep dentin, your amount of blue etch exposure, because the deeper you are by the pulp, the less fibrils you have, but each of those fibrils are even more heavily coated by hydroxyapatite. So close to the DEJ, you've got a lot of fibrils, not a lot of crystal, but close to the pulp, it becomes more and more like a glass, more and more like enamel. It becomes more susceptible to brittle fracture. Weird. So you got to really respect deep dentin if possible. So now that I see that most of you guys don't really use microabrasion, I know you want to be happier dentists. So something you can do, like for example, I started out by using a Danville micro etcher. This is like, you know, kind of like this like abrasion unit. You chuck it on. It's got a cable coupling. Chuck it onto your airline. You turn off the water, otherwise there's disaster. And then you're just you blast it, and then like, you know, you continue with your workflow. I've got the what is it? The micro prep, the Danville micro prep or prep start. The Danville prep start now, which is plumbed directly into your airline. I know that in Australia they charge like $7,500 for this particular unit, but you know what? If you have a buddy, a friend, family in the States, it's like $1,500. Just get it from them. It doesn't require Australian or New Zealand power. And you get Jenks or whoever to plumb it into your chair, and all of a sudden it's stuck in your room, unfortunately, for other people that want to use it. But for your associates, you can get them to use a micro etcher or similar. There's also the RondoFlex as well, which is a really good portable solution. So there's all these different options. You know, there's Crystal Mark, which is excellent on the market as well. It's been around for a long time. So microabrasion is going to change your life. So what do we talk about? We talk about etching that enamel for about 10 seconds, splashing onto dentin, maybe for 5-10 seconds, rinse, 7 seconds total. You're going to dry, you're going to over dry. Who cares? Who cares? You've overdrive dentin. What are you going to do now? What have you activated when you've etched the dentin? You've activated MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases. How do you put those guys to sleep? Chlorhexidine. Okay, so what percentage? 2%. Where do you get it from? I get mine from Vista. It's a big bottle. Lasts you 3 practicing careers. Let's just say you drip a little bit into a Dappen dish. You're going to take it. You're going to scrub. Your prep is sopping wet over the course of 30 seconds. Then you're going to take your triplex. You're going to puff your mirror to make sure there's no water contamination in your airline. Puff, puff. It's dry. You're going to go to the tooth. Puff, puff. You're watching it the whole time. Puff. As soon as that super glossy surface just disappears, that's perfectly moist dentin. So we're talking about you on the beach. You're watching the waves roll in, and the waves start to recede, and it's glossy, but at that moment where it just disappears, that sheen, that's perfectly moist dentin. That's what you're looking for. So you're using very conservative little puffs with your triplex. And then as soon as that's perfectly moist dentin, now it's the time to apply your primer and then your bond, or the combination if you're going to be using a 7th generation or an 8th generation adhesive agent. Make sense? So, okay, let's continue. Now you'll see deep inside here as well. And I know I'm lingering on a picture because this is what I like to do sometimes. It's all about the detail, right? How are you going to actually restore this first? So a lot of you guys maybe would say, okay, well, I'm just going to use like the centripetal layering technique. I'm just going to layer at the lower or the upper first, and then the lower, and then go back and forth and stuff like that. Don't do that. What you want to do is you want to use really, really, really thin layer of flowable, like permaflow, like, you know, Clearfill Majesty Aesthetic, like Genial Universal Injectable, something with a super low shrinkage stress, and you want to line your dentin. How thick? No more than 0.5 millimeter, 1/4 mil, 0.5 millimeter. Why? Let me ask you a question, all right? So you've just bonded this, right? We went through this whole thing. You just bonded this. How thick is your bond layer? Well, if you're using G Premium Bond from GC, let's just say it's 3 microns. You're thinking, that's awesome. You know, that's the type of stuff that I would use to cement an onlay, to cement a crown. I could cure it before because I don't really care. Even if it pools and stuff, it's not going to pool that much. 3 microns is nothing. It's not going to impede my set. But now you've cured it. Is it cured? Is your bond cured? Fabio, send out a poll. Is your bond cured? If you've cured it, you take your brand new Bevel Grand, you've hit the bond layer with your light. It's 3 microns thick. Is your bond layer cured? You'll find very quickly that the bond layer is not cured.
Give me a quick moment here. I actually have some results to share.
Okay, yeah, let's share them.
And then I'll prepare this next one.
Okay, so only total edge, etch and range, 32. Mostly total edge, etch and range. Okay, both total etch and self etch selectively. I mean, that's cool. So the majority of you guys are using both total etch and self etch selectively. I like it. I like it. That's really cool. That's what I use as well.
What should I ask him?
The problem, yeah, the thing is, if you hit, okay, let's just say we added bond. Let's say the cord was in place, with the rubber dams, you know, your brinker's in place, and you've micro-aerabrated, you've etched, you've chlorhexidine, you've bonded, you've air thinned, you've hit it with the light. Is it cured? Is your bond layer cured? Is that enough to prevent post-op sensitivity? And, you know, just answer, even though I'm going to continue talking, because otherwise I'm going to take up all night and you'll be like, you've gone through 2 slides. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that was a, the thing is, it's not cured, because what's in the air? Oxygen. How thick is the oxygen inhibition layer? It's 15 microns. You got a bond layer that's 3 microns, and your oxygen inhibition layer is 15. It's not cured at all. So what you're doing is you're going to take a 1/4 mil and you're going to spread it out with the tip of your really sharp instrument, like your TN-10-1 in my kit, something super sharp, and you're going to hit it with the light. Now you're suffocating that initial bond layer, you're curing through it, and now you've got minimal shrinkage stress, and you've hybridized your dentin. Now you're going to do another layer, 1/4 millimeter, hit it with the light, another 1/4 millimeter, hit it with the light. Now you can layer conventionally, however you want to layer, all right? But don't go first, and don't stress your bond or your hybrid layer before it's truly hybridized, is my point, all right? Yes, excellent. So people know that it's not fully cured. So that's why you should really take it slow. Patience is everything before you start stressing that hybrid layer. All right, moving on. So this is real life dentistry. I'm not here to show you super pretty stuff, right? I mean, this is what happens. You know, you're prepping a box, and then you're going to see down here, you got some calculus. It's a mess. You know, your rubber dam ripped. What are you going to do? Are you going to like take off your dam and you're going to subject your patient already hates you, right? And you're saying, oh, excuse me, I know you're watching Gossip Girl, but we're going to have to like interrupt your program, you know, like your programming in order to replace your rubber dam and stuff like that. Sometimes you just don't have time, all right? And that's reality. That's reality. You might have to use Teflon. You might have to use, you know, some cord and everything like that. But in these types of situation here, you want to make sure you've got isolation, because you got deep dentin exposed, which is, you know, you got a lot of really big tubules and not a lot of collagen fibrils. You want to make sure the main way to reduce post-op sensitivity, number 1, is to follow the bonding protocol, but number 2 is to make sure that you have chlorhexidine on there for enough time to disinfect the area as well, because that is one of the main reasons for post-op pulpitis. You want to restore one tooth, before the other. You can kind of see here the cavo surface margin. I've got a really, really fine bevel here. I haven't used anything really special. I've taken my burr and I've tipped it on its head and I've just rounded that off, all right? And that, the goal of that is to try to prevent white line fever, which is that ripping away of enamel rods from that composite that we spoke about before. So pretty much the rule is the closer you are to a cusp tip, the more vertically aligned those enamel rods are. So remember, you can't bond to the sides of enamel rods. You got to bond to the ends of enamel rods. And that's why the closer you are to a cusp tip, you're like, the more aggressively across those enamel rods, you've got a bevel. Otherwise, you'll have an increased chance of getting white line fever, all right? So this is an example.
I got a question here that may be pertinent, if I may.
Yes, let's do it. Yeah, this is very informal tonight, guys. I'm here for you, even though I should be sleeping. I'm just joking.
So Dr. Nuha, Camille is asking, can you put a thin layer of gluma before you bond?
Yeah, gluma is wonderful. Gluma or glutaraldehyde is a substitute for chlorhexidine, so you can use that instead of the 2% chlorhexidine I mentioned before. Absolutely, that's a great question. And of course, my friend and mentor Leanne Brady from Scottsdale, she actually does use gluma religiously. So in this situation here, you know, like the anatomy is whatever, but if we restore one tooth first before the other, what I like to do first is I like to, if it's back to back, I'm not going to do them back to back because I've got no control over any overhangs or any proximal contour irregularities that I'm not happy with. Let's just say if you wanted to use your Triodent or your Palodent Plus or your Garrison back to back, you might pull it off and it might be absolutely perfect first time. But I would prefer to use an omnimatrix, for example, on one or the other tooth, your choice, right? Whatever you want to do, you want to finish that tooth completely before micro-air-braiding and completing the other tooth. And that way, you can actually use your soft flex disc and finish the first tooth perfectly before you do the other one. So definitely for back-to-back posteriors, slow it down, and you're going to find a lot more predictability in that contact and that contour. So over here, we talked about possibly, if I wanted to use a rubber dam, I'm going to use a 2A clamp, but I'm going to use my flat beak pliers for my orthodontic kit, and I'm going to tweak it so that it's kind of aiming more apically, if you will, and then I'm going to gently apply it to that area there, okay? Otherwise, a regular 2A is not going to cut it. This is the most distal tooth in the arch, and unfortunately, my Brinker B4 does not have the, I guess the lack of spring-off capability to be used in this situation. So I would use like a 2A clamp, but a modified 2A clamp where the tines are positioned on the facial more apically. So you'd pack in the cord in this case here if you wanted to kind of do it without the rubber dam here, and then you would follow the previous description of how we would actually do that, all right? So, so we did one side and not the other. Again, these areas up here incisivally, hard to do because we have to bevel pretty significantly if you want to avoid that white line. We've all placed restorations and they look pretty good on curing, but by the time you kind of use your football shape diamond and you're kind of finishing it back, you're like, oh man, this white line pops up and it really pisses you off. So really pay attention to the fact that closer you are to a cusp tip or an incisal edge, the more aggressively you got to bevel across your cavo surface in order to minimize any white line fever, right? And you kind of see CervicClear. The material used was GC Essentia U. It's kind of my go-to for class 5s. It's just got the right consistency that I like. And I left the other side for the patient just to, you know, because I was tired. And just simple as that.
Clarence, real quick, when we're talking about white line, a question here from Dr. Jason Wu. Apart from chlorhexidine and beveling, is there anything else you can do to avoid the white line?
Yeah, definitely conservative layering. And you got to really pay attention to what you choose as your lining composite. So for me, I use, okay, it's not the lowest shrinkage stress in the market. I think it's around 6.7 megapascals of shrinkage stress. What's the lowest one that I know of? It's like genial universal injectable at 1 megapascal. Okay, actually I lie. There's a Guillemeur by Shofu called Beautiful X injectable, and that's got 0.85 of a megapascal. That's crazy. It's got fluoride release, all those good things, and it's a Guillemeur. So it's got some pretty good technology in it. You should read up about that, but you would be lining it conservatively in multiple layers before loading your composite with regular packable composite, and that's something that I would do for sure. Okay, it's a great question. So Annalise here, take a look at her. So when you do your full patient exam, you take your standardized photo series. I take the AAC photo series because that's what I've been trained to do. But what you're looking for not only is a social smile, you're looking for a Duchenne smile. Duchenne smile is a fancy term for your biggest, ugliest smile. And let's see how much pink shows. So Fabio, you do it. I'm looking at you, Fabio. Do your Duchenne smile because it's not pretty. It's not pretty. All of you guys do it. Okay, so in your Duchenne smile, if you have greater than 9 millimeters of gingival display, you are considered to have a gummy smile. All right, 9 millimeters is quite a lot in your Duchenne smile. But if you had, for example, you know, like, I don't know, 4 millimeters initially, and then you smile, and then, you know, you've got another, and then your lip mobility goes up maybe another 7, you've got 11, chances are it's not altered passive eruption. It's most likely VME, or vertical maxillary access, all right? So it's an important thing to know. In this situation, it's a no-brainer that this is aesthetically critical. And the reason why Annalise presented to us was because she wasn't happy with the aesthetics of her 2-1. Showing you exactly what it looks like inside, you know, it's got an old flexi post with some suspect lateral shadowing on the flexi post. It doesn't really have much of an obturation cervically. And because of this, and because you can see the facial margin's been leaking for a long time, I wanted her to have that retreated just to be absolutely safe, and maybe to put a bonded post and core in there. All right, the color is going to be different. I also wanted internal bleaching to be completed before we actually started, all right, as well as external bleaching, all right? So here we obviously know that we want to balance the pink aesthetics if possible, all right? So we're going to be looking at that. And it's not exactly a situation where you have to use digital smile design, because it's you can use your eye in this situation. You're not doing a whole smile makeover or rehabilitation here, all right? You still want to do a wax up though, because you want to make sure that there's no midline cant and everything. You don't want to wing it and go to the final stage. So I've taken kind of a 2-stage asilicone putty here using Ivoclar's virtual, all right? So in this situation here, after we've taken off the crown and after the endo's been retreated, we want to block out the core. It's really important for me to try to match prep shades or stump shades whenever possible. It makes your technician's life a lot easier. It's so easy for us to default to say, hey, let's just use zirconia. And you know what? Ivoclar's got that really sexy new zirconia, which is like the IPS Zircad multi, you know, which looks really, really amazing. But let's try to make the technician's life as easy as possible. Because if I could use something like Emax HT here, I'd love it. I'd love it. That's like much sexier than MT, but I think I actually ended up using MT here. So I used, to block out the stump shade, I used an opaquer, and then I used some Vitalessence B1. For those of you guys who have used Vitalessence before, which is Ultradent's aesthetic composite layering system here in Australasia, like the B1s and the A1s and the A2s are actually dentin shades, and their enamel is achromatic, like in nature. Like in nature. Remember, the hue of a tooth or the color comes from actually the dentin. And the value in the chroma is modulated by the thickness of your enamel. So for the enamel layers, the 2 main ones are Pearl Neutral and Pearl Frost, which are really, really cool names. But it is a bit of a beast. It's a beautiful material, but it's like a bull. You know those guys in the rodeos riding the bulls and stuff like that? You got to master it. You got to brush it. You've got to, like, you know, and if you can get it where you want it to go and everything, and you cure it, you polish it, it'll reward you in spades. It's absolutely really beautiful. When I take my stump shades, of course, don't take it vertically. You want to get as close in the picture to your stumps as possible. So here we've got the natural dye shade guide from Ivoclar, and you want to hold it horizontally, perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth. And that'll allow you to have the minimal distance that your eye needs to travel from middle of your target tooth to middle of your shade guide. All right, I'm just gonna get a move on here, otherwise we're not gonna get done. So what we're gonna do here now is we've prepped everything. We prepped it down initially to the level of the gingiva, and now we wanna do a little bit of lengthening. So of course, they're anesthetized, we're sounding the bone. You wanna make sure the bone is mid-facially 3 millimeters away from your new gingival sulcus, all right? Or your new gingival margin, I should say. And interproximally or at the facial proximal line angles, 4 millimeters is a safe point, all right? We've seen cases where you might actually have like an entire area of chronic inflammation across the entire facial. And then when you actually lift the flap, the only area that's violating biologic width might only be on the mesial buccal. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So it doesn't need to be violated everywhere for inflammation to show everywhere, is what I'm saying. All right, so here we're going to pack some cord. We got underneath there, it's a bit purple, you see there, so you got some number 1 ultra pack. All right, just a word about how I finish my margins. So usually in a case that's not as messy as this, I would use a double accord. After I've prepped equigingival, I use a double accord, it retracts it a slight bit more, and then I prep to the level equal to the top of the double accord. And that should leave you with a really nice intrasulcular margin position. So it's important to understand and review kind of the elements of biologic width. You know, there's some people with crests that are super high, and by high crest, I mean, wow, it's really close to my gingival margin. And if you actually even go in the sulcus or even a little bit too deep, your risk for violating that biologic width is massive, all right? So in a situation where you're, for example, you're just retracting and stuff, you're just like, hey, I've heard that you can use the laser, the Gemini. You can use that for troughing. Does that cause more gingival recession relative to using cord, especially in a thin biotype? Well, a thin biotype is at risk for recession anyway, but it's important to realize that in the literature, the difference is actually not that much, not that much. All right, so these are the elements. Obviously, this is initially documented by Gargiulo et al. In '61. So the sulcus is actually not that much, and we're actually probing into the junctional epithelium as well, usually. All right, so in terms of recession, the difference is 0.26 versus 0.27 millimeters with a laser. It's not significant at all. It's 1/100th of a millimeter difference. And this was in a 2016 study in the JPD. Talking about different thicknesses, you're thinking, how did you actually lengthen? If you're violating biologic width and you're using that laser and you're cutting it to where you want, you know, how are you modifying that? In cases where you're doing multiple teeth, yes, I will lift a flap, all right, using an incisal reference in terms of like where my gingival margin is going to be. But this is a study showing a difference between an Iranian study. So you have, you know, somebody who's got like, you know, like a more heavy set bone structure, let's just say, compared to Koreans, all right? And let's just say Asians have got a little bit more of a finer alveolar or buccal cortex thickness. So, but you can see in general, it's roughly around the 1 millimeter mark. Indeed, Coyce says 87% of individuals are 1 millimeter or less thickness of the facial bone, all right, of the facial cortex. So if it's 1 mil or less, you'll probably be successful by using this instrument here, which is called the KB1 by Brassler, by Coyce, and by Betsy Bakeman from the Coyce Center. And there's a black mark over here, which is at the 3 millimeter mark. So all you need to do is you need to just wiggle it under the gum. You feel the cortex and you kind of twist, and crack. And you're kind of bringing that level of the bony crest down to the level where it reestablishes biologic width. And that's what you're actually after, all right? So in this situation here, she's in provisionals. Obviously, she had some turmeric. Number one thing with any provisionals, I've yet to meet a provisional material that doesn't love turmeric and doesn't want to let it go. So you see it's kind of yellow. But what we're doing is we have a final opportunity to see, do you have a midline cant? You know, are the gingival margins level and things like that? And in this situation here, I did actually do everything at the same time, although sometimes I do wait anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months for the gingival level to settle before I actually prep the teeth, but I did it all at the same time. On 3-month post-op, this is a situation here. We were successful in getting, I guess, like a degree of levelness of the gingival margins, and the zeniths look relatively symmetrical, although, you know, the mesial distal width here is slightly different from here, but the patient's really happy. And in an aesthetically critical case, I'm okay with that. So we use IPS MT, Emax MT. I would actually have loved to use an HT. You see how there's kind of a gray hue to the enamel here. That's why I really love the high translucency ingot relative to the medium translucency ingot. Switching gears back to back. So these types of situations here, sometimes amalgam contacts are so tight, and you're going to get that ripping, right? And it's not your assistant's fault. It's no one's fault. It's just the way that things are, all right? And, you know, when we're doing quadrant dentistry, I like to do one tooth before the other. Make sure you have line angle clearance. And what I mean by that is convenience form. You can't actually check on recall what you can't see. So there are those rare cases where you're doing a super conservative slot where you're actually not breaking contact. And in this case, the OmniMatrix is the best tool to get through there, because you can't get a Garrison through there. You can't get a Palodent. You can't get a Triodent. There's no shot. It's contoured. There's no way you're getting it down there. Whereas this, you can feel all the way home. So you can see the adaptation here, and you just want to obviously make sure that there are no deficiencies. If there are, you want to use some Teflon, and you want to supplement or even wrap your whole wedge in Teflon and shove it in again. And that'll increase the size a little bit if it's between wedge sizes. That's what I mean. So now we're going to be doing kind of, yeah, a lot of you guys are using Triodent, which is really cool. Supporting New Zealand. Actually, he sold it, right, to an American company, but doesn't matter. He's a nice guy, right? Did you hear he tried to like fix a duck's bill with composite, and then it was good because the duck lived for a while and then it died. But he's still a hero in my eyes. That's really cool. Anyway, yeah, so we did one tooth at a time, and now we're going to smash the other tooth. Obviously, Garrison going in. And all right, let me see. All right, you want to convert your class 2 to a class 1. There was a recent article from the AACD. It's really, really cool. You can break this marginal ridge into 2 or 3 or 4 different increments, depending on the anatomy that you want interproximally. That means you're using vertical layering. I'm not going to bore you right now, but we could go into a study about what is the most effective for micro shear bond strength, microtensile shear bond strength. And it's not oblique layering like we learned in dental school. It's not dun, 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 dun. It's actually horizontal layering. So the pull-out strength or the shear bond strength, suffice it to say, is the greatest when you have horizontal layers that are 1 millimeter or less. Not oblique layers 1 millimeter or less, horizontal millimeters. You can go vertically across from buccal to lingual as well, and that pull-out strength or that microtensile shear bond strength is not the same as if you were to use, well, they say in the study, a single layer of 1 millimeter horizontal at the base before you do your conventional layering. But I like to do 1 millimeter all the way up, okay? Which sometimes messes my ability to create really cool things like cracks. So why didn't I actually blitz that distal wall and actually do an MOD? Because if it doesn't actually affect dentin, if it doesn't penetrate past the enamel into dentin, I'm not going to compromise that wall. It's only when I see it into dentin, that's a super highway for bacteria to colonize. Makes sense? Remember, enamel and dentin are meant to have cracks. Take a look in your mirror after you finish your bowl of ramen tonight and look at your front teeth with your iPhone flashlight. You're going to see cracks. Why don't these cracks go all the way through our teeth? It's because nature's beautiful. There's a modulus of elasticity mismatch between enamel and dentin. Cracks are going to propagate through enamel for the most part, but stop at the DEJ because of a modulus of elasticity mismatch. The dentin is spongier, so nature is brilliant. Unless you've got a catastrophic car accident, there's no way it's going to go through and through. All right. So yeah, here I've layered the base with PermaFlow. PermaFlow is like super runny, super opaque. It's something that I really, really love to use. And it's something that my colleagues at the Canadian Dental Association actually evaluated back in 2003. So you don't need to use any crazy forms, just some simple lines and everything like that, and you can get a restoration to blend. And you know, that's that. All right, so let's move on. I want to check my time. Perfect. All right, so this is another example where, quadrant dentistry and just introducing kind of a little subset of instruments that I created with Hugh Freedy. I don't get paid by them or anything like that, but I just thought I'd really introduce you to that. So you can kind of see here, we've got a really skinny instrument that you can use to distribute the initial layer of flow. Because let's just say, what's the problem here? It's super dark. What if your assistant is, okay, what if you're using a light from China, which is all good, okay? If you have, you know, it's kind of like, you know, it's hit and miss. If you have one with the right intensity, what's the right intensity? What are you looking for? You're looking for at least 800 milliwatts per centimeter squared at the point of curing. So let's just say you've got your Velo and it's like on standard mode and it's like 1300. Let's just say that's cool. What if you're holding it 2.5 kilometers away from the tooth? Is it 1300? No, it's not. What if your assistant is curing the rubber dam clamp? That's a problem. What if your assistant is curing the cotton roll? That's even more of a problem because this is obviously a molar restoration. You definitely want to be using rubber dam. So you want to make sure you're as close to the game as possible because you're looking for 20,000 joules per centimeter squared to cure a composite completely. Let's do some math. The average light has got 800 milliwatts per centimeter squared. How many seconds do you cure an increment for? 20 seconds. 800 times 20 is 16,000 milliwatts per centimeter squared. That's 16,000 joules per centimeter squared. That's 16,000 out of 20,000. That's 80% curing of every single layer. So if you're going to be crazy and if you're going to use a bulk fill and you're going to load it up and you're saying, oh yeah, I'm just going to shine this really bright light on it, but somehow your angle is kind of off, are you, number one, curing all the way down through that bulk fill to the base? Number two, have you respected that hybrid layer? And is that hybrid layer going to rip away? Because if you bring that composite and that tooth to the testing table and you do a micro tensile shear strength, I bet you it won't even make it to the table. It'll fall out. So you got to understand that you got to respect your substrate before you stress it. And so when I say bulk fills, just like there's a guy in Japan, Junya Tagami, of course you guys know him in the world of bonding. He says, use bulk fills, not like a bulk fill. Bulk fills are wonderful because bulk fills have got great chameleon effect, they've got great penetration of depth, which means they've got great monomer conversion, but at the same time, bulk fills, if you use them irresponsibly, are not so great because obviously you'll be stressing that layer there. And even though bulk fills have got low shrinkage stress, something's got to give. For every up, there's a down in life. So in this situation, I had a question the other day about, oh yeah, well, you know, I'm going to be using, let's just say, Voco's Rebuild a GT post, you know, and that post is kind of like one post made of tiny multiple posts. And if I were to have used that post, it's got a flexural modulus of 11 gigapascals, okay, which is kind of the same as deep dentin. But if you take a look at this number here, 12.5 gigapascals permaflow, you could actually use permaflow in place of the entire thing, and you could actually have a stronger, more dentin-like replacement as well. Because let's be honest, what happens in a situation where that case I posted on social the other day, let's just pretend it snapped off and you had a post in it. Let's just say I did this beautiful fiber post in it, it snapped off. How are you going to retreat it? You can't. It's game over, right? So there is, I know I digress and I always do this and stuff like that, but here's a question for you. In that situation where you know that, okay, I want to put a post in there and this tooth is on its last legs, meaning it's got very little coronal structure, you could either put a fiber post, and the fiber post is going to be what, 11 gigapascals? That's cool. That's cool. And it's tooth colored. That's cool. Or you can put in a parapost. And you're thinking, man, metal? What? Dark? Whoa, nightmare. Why would you suggest that? What's the mode of failure of putting a parapost in? Oblique root fracture. Oblique root fracture, right? Now you got to ask yourself, okay, what's the mode of failure of using a bonded fiber post? Your crown's going to fall off. It's going to be decoronated. It's going to be beheaded. Okay, which is worse? They're both bad. It's game over. What takes a greater force to fracture? Oh, the force to fracture is actually greater for the parapost restored tooth relative to the bonded fiber tooth. Either way, remember, it's game over for the tooth. But it's just, I just want to challenge your thinking in terms of maybe there's a different way to think about that. Because either way, you want the tooth to have its best legs standing for its best prognosis. All right, so here we've got a really, really flat plastic. Okay, a lot of you guys haven't used bulk fills. And this one you can use to really, really kind of compress the thinness of that marginal ridge before you actually cure it. I know that Sandra Hulak in Hong Kong, she does this in one layer. I do this in multiple layers and stuff like that. And I might do kind of I try to use the 1 millimeter horizontal layering rule. And that's one way to kind of avoid white line fever as well, because obviously your C factor situation here is not very ideal, right? So it didn't really actually make sense when I thought, hey, horizontal layering, wait, you're bonding to three surfaces, you know, instead of oblique. Doesn't make any sense, but the research says differently. So how I layer is after you create a class 1, you take everything off. Why? Because now you have the chance to, if the tooth in front of it was actually intact, you could actually use some floss, check the contact. If it's a garbage contact, you're gonna be blowing that away again. You haven't spent any time at all on your occlusal layering. This situation here, obviously we're gonna be addressing this next. So we're gonna be layering. I start first with my mesial buccal lobe always. That's my compass point. If I can put that lobe there, I can see the rest of the tooth. All right, so I encourage you guys to kind of do the mesial buccal first, followed by the distal buccal. Then you cure it, and then what you want to do then is you actually want to take your stain, take your tint, and you want to tint the vertical aspects of the lobes, right? Interlobar staining technique. You hit it with the light, 10 seconds. Then you want to do your mesial palatal, then you do your distal palatal, then you do your mid-mesial. All right, at the end, if you want to stain some more, you can, okay? But typically, if you do this, like I said before in one of the forum posts, is you'll have this tint peeking through like lingerie. It's sexier than if you were to kind of splash it on the surface and try to dilute it with your microbrush and stuff. It doesn't always work, and sometimes it turns into a little bit of a mess. All right. So in this situation here, we've got that really sharp instrument. You know, those of you guys who have the TN10 kit or the School Tools kit from Hugh Freedy know which instrument I'm talking about. All right, so remember this critical number, 20,000 joules per centimeter squared or 20,000 milliwatts per centimeter squared, massive, all right? It's important that you get as close to the action as possible and use a quality of light, because that more than anything dictates how long your restoration is gonna last for. Because if your assistant's curing 5 kilometers away from the tooth and then you're like, you know, 2 years later, oh, the margins are, yeah, that's horrible. The margins are, this composite's garbage. Actually, maybe it's the technique that is a little bit deficient, right? So we shouldn't be so quick to judge, all right? So this is what I mean about lingerie kind of poking through. You know, it's a little bit, it adds some depth and three-dimensionality and everything like that. And this is the other end of that TN10-1 instrument I was talking about. It's a party hat. And it's got that aluminum titanium nitride coating, which is non-stick. So definitely don't scrub this with a burr brush, if you will. All right, I'm just gonna continue. So it's a party hat. And what I have here is version 1.0 of my extended shank ball burnisher. You can kind of see how long the shank is. It's not a normal ball burnisher. It's got like a super long elephant trunk. But the ball at the end is a little bit too big for my liking. So I've developed a version 2.0. So if you talk to your Hugh Fruity rep from Hallis or from Shine, they'll be able to kind of get you in touch and get the kit with the version 2.0, which is essentially half the diameters. Half the diameters, I think this is the TN10-2 instrument. It's got half the diameter of this particular ball here on both sides. So it's actually really, really beautiful for micro sculpting, and I find it very, very useful. All right. So I use this for deep oblique compression. If you guys use the snow shovel technique or the shovel technique, whatever you guys call it, the snowplow technique, you put some flow and then you put some packable and you're like, I don't want any gaps, you know? Yeah, you can use that and it works really, really well, especially in the back or the posterior areas where it's hard to access, So you can kind of see, we build up the wall and you can check the contact before you continue. And the layering is exactly the same sequence as we talked about before, okay? We're just repeating that. All right, and afterwards, you know, you can see the anatomy. Once you actually put in the mesial buccal, you can visualize that, and you want to make sure that there's some cleavage, right? There's, you know, I talked about lingerie, I talked about cleavage. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's the hump day, it's Wednesday, you know, it's just how it is, guys. It's just how it is. But you're gonna be doing this every day, right? Putting your heart and soul into every single thing possible. All right, so this is what the kit looks like. You can use it for direct and indirect. This purple guy here is a 204S scaler, which I really like. You can use it for your crown cementations, your onlay cementations. This is all I use for my direct and indirect kits, respectively, every day. Remember, this flat plastic is perfectly tuned. It's very thin. It's got medium flex. Don't use it to pop your contacts. You know how you stick your flat plastics between your teeth and you like tweak it a little bit and you hear that little mopper pop? Don't do that unless you want to break your instrument. You know, use something you don't like, you know, like that other instrument. You know the one, right? You call it the George or you call it the whatever. Here's another example of the laser in action. So you got, you know, and cases are not perfect, right? They never are. The hardest thing in cosmetic dentistry is to match a single tooth in a sea of natural teeth, you know, because of all the nuances. This is just an example of a mistake. It just happens. So you kind of see how this tooth is dark and value, it's endo-treated and everything. And the patient wanted a restorative solution because they did not want to do internal bleaching again. And with a gummy smile, our goal was to also level the pink aesthetics if possible. We wanted to use the Vital Essence series here. So what we did is we used the diode, and this is a SuperPulsed laser. It's pretty cool. It's got the really efficient cutter, which is the 810 nanometer, okay? That really has affinity for hemoglobin, and the 980 actually has affinity for water. So 980 is not so much of an efficient cutter, but what it does is it works to accelerate healing through its actions on mitochondria and ATP production, and it works in something called photobiomodulation. So this is the type of wavelength you would want if you were creating low-level laser therapy to your TMJ or your masseters and things like that for alternative therapies. Okay, so after this, obviously our goal was to, I think it was too messy to kind of do in one day, so we wanted to kind of do the osseous recontouring. And yeah, like a diode is absolutely essential in my practice. Sometimes retraction cord just can't get rid of the tissue that's flopping in my way. And it actually, sometimes I need a diode and cord soaked in Viscostat original to stop a bleed. This is the chisel I talked about. You can see the 3 millimeter marking down here. So what I'm doing is I'm trying this first. If this doesn't work, I'm gonna have to lift a flap, okay? And I probably would not do releasing incisions here. I'd probably just use an envelope. But pretty much what you want to do is you want to feel underneath, engage the cortex, and it's got a bevel here, and you want to try to tweak and crack bits of that cortex away until you hit that black line. Then you want to use your scaler, and you want to scale at all the bits. Obviously, you don't want to be trapping those bits subgingivally during the healing phase, all right? So this is, again, by Brasler, called the KB1 Wedelstadt chisel, which is pretty cool. And all right, this is it at full depth. It's messy, right? I mean, you don't necessarily want to be doing a composite on this day, on the same day. Okay, so at the end of the day, it kind of looks messy and everything like that. Okay, and you let it heal. Okay, in the situation here, I think we let it heal only for about 3 weeks. I think they had an event that they needed to get to. So here's the situation. We're taking the shade. You can use shade buttons, okay? So take actual samples of the composite you want to use for the enamel, you want to use for the dentin, and put it exactly in the area that you want to use it, all right? If you want to use a shade tab or something, don't use the Vita Classic shade tab. Use the shade tab that came with the kit, because that's made with the actual composite. Now remember that depending on the composition of your composite, microfill, okay, when you put these shade tabs on here, you want to hit it with the light for 5 seconds. And the reason is there's always a color shift. Microfills become lighter when you cure them. Microhybrids become darker when you cure them. Nanohybrids and nanofills are supposed to stay color constant, but they don't. They also become lighter when you cure them generally. So cure them, then take a picture, then choose your colors from your picture. Don't choose it under the overhead light or anything like that. Your eyes cannot discern too much. Choose it from your camera. And I set the white balance for my camera at flash. mark and value, but it goes to show that it's really hard to kind of do a single tooth and match it. There's a few things we saw in there. Obviously, I had the serrated strip wrapping around the tooth while I microaerabrated and while I etched the tooth, and that's just to protect the adjacent enamel from, you know, anything you're doing. You can actually use Teflon as well, but I like to visualize and see the color of the adjacent teeth while I'm working. Now, if you had a natural tooth next door like I did, one thing you could do is to prevent or to kind of like hold off dehydration for as long as possible. As soon as you get the rubber dam on, what you want to do is just take some unfilled resin, some bis GMA, and paint it all over that adjacent tooth and hit it with the light. You're going to suffocate that moisture inside the tooth, and it's going to stay looking the way it is longer than if you were to just like let it dehydrate. Okay, so that's a way that you can kind of like stave off, you can stave off dehydration for a tiny little period in time. So you saw also in my translucent layer, the more you handle a product, the more space dust gets in. Space dust is all that black speckles and stuff like that. It really pisses me off, especially on a 42-inch monitor. It would piss you off too. So yeah, just try to minimize the amount. You kind of handle the material. It's kind of, it's a pet peeve of mine, you know, but it's the bane of my existence. Guys, you guys haven't been introduced to Mosaic, but in the States, they've got this material that's just like the strongest nanohybrid that I've ever seen. It's mental. I mean, I speak a lot about Voco Grandio SO. You know, the compressive strength of enamel is 384 megapascals, and that of dentin is 297. So I'm like, yeah, Voco Grandio SO is awesome. 439 megapascals, fantastic, right? Mosaic's at 486. 486. I mean, that's stronger than enamel and then some, you know, but a lot of, you know, like the composite products at Ultradent are actually like that as well. We'll talk about ExpertTemp later on as well. ExpertTemp's like around the 440s for compressive strength. It's actually really, really impressive. So from, I think Dan Fisher was just as obsessive a clinician as I am and stuff, if not more. So the products that he makes for the most part, I really, really like. So in this situation here, you can kind of see the depth of this recurrent caries. Ideally, yeah, some of you guys are thinking, hey, you know, why don't you actually like, you know, take that out a little bit more and have it kind of, I don't know, is that unsupported enamel? You know, like it might be, but sometimes you got to push the limits a little bit to be conservative. And, you know, so far restorations that I've done like this have been okay. So you can kind of see, because the line angle is intact, that you can actually fit a traditional sectional matrix on there and you can layer. So again, you know, a lot of you guys are tempted, hey, look, it's so deep, my patient's waiting, I'm just gonna smash in a layer of bulk fill. Don't do it. Don't do it for the love, you know, for the love of Arnie, for the love of anything, don't do it, all right? You wanna do it slow, you wanna be patient, and restorations like this will last you possibly longer than the 15-year mark. So, yeah, just under different lighting and everything like that. And I know we're kind of running kind of at the hour 15 mark. Fabio, you gonna give me a thumbs up or you gonna give me a thumbs down still, maybe 5 minute mark or something like that, and then we'll cut it, or you want me to go like for another 3 hours?
I think we're doing okay. If you could go for another 3 hours, I would suggest we find a breaking point afterwards, and then we schedule a second session.
Let's have drinks. I mean, let's.
There we go. There we go.
This is fun. This is fun. Okay, how about, let's say 5 minutes, we'll cut it off and we'll kind of continue.
And we have plenty of questions as well.
Okay, maybe we should, okay, hold on, I'm just gonna exit just for a second and see where we are. Okay, remember guys that this presentation, I don't know, it's got 135 slides. I'm so sorry, why do I do that? It's like, you know, it's like you took an hour and 15 minutes and you've gone through 44 slides. Congratulations. No. I mean, because we're talking about things and it's all about the detail. And I think it's important. If I glaze things over and my goal is just to get to the finish line, who cares? I mean, you know, it doesn't do you any good. You're just like, wow, I saw a bunch of cases and I think I remember this. But if I emphasize certain things, you know, I mean, then it makes it fun. And I think that, you know, I'd love to spend more time with you, even though this is more of a soliloquy relative to a discussion. But let's discuss, because, I mean, let's hear what these questions are.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
If, depending on the flow of your presentation, if you would have some sort of another chapter for it, then we go then and we end with questions, or is this now a good breaking point and then we go for questions?
this is a good point, because we're just about to delve into infiltration and incisor hypomin, which is a really cool and topic that's really close to my heart. But now's a good time for questions and stuff like that. I mean, you know, remember, we have the rest of our lives together, not us, you know what I mean? Like, you know, there will be another chance.
There'll be other chances, absolutely.
Like, there's no rush to kind of like, you know, let's like go to the buffet and do the sushi bar and the steaks. I mean, maybe tonight's just the steaks, or if you're a vegetarian, it's the vegan burger.
All right. So let me start here then. Yeah, I'm not muted. So could you please repeat your bonding protocol? This one was even uploaded. So.
All right, awesome. Okay, so let's just pretend you're going to bevel. Sometimes you're going to use a long bevel, an infinity bevel, a starburst bevel. A starburst bevel is essentially imagine, okay, I'm just going to do this and get this out of my face. Hold on for a second. So imagine if you had like a C-shaped lesion, right? Kind of like class 5. You're going to do your infinity bevel, and then sometimes you want to fool the eye even more. And what you want to do is you want to use your needlepoint diamond, and you want to create kind of like, remember when you were kids and you drew the sun and there's different rays at different lengths and everything like that in different depths? So what you want to do kind of at the margin, and what you're doing is you're creating areas where when you restore it, the composite's going to have varying thicknesses right at the level of the fracture line. So that'll fool the eye a little bit more. So you want to bevel in one way or another, okay, first. Then you want to micro abrade. By doing that, again, you're going to increase your surface area for bonding by 3-fold. Just like your small intestines, it's kind of like, you know, your microvilli have a lot of surface area for absorption of nutrients. So you're looking for increased micromechanical retention, increased grip. Because on top of that, one thing we didn't just discuss tonight was what's in peak universal bond that makes it so strong. And I swear I do not know, because I, as you know, love MDP, right? Remember how I said, you know, I'm like, so the first thing I said to like Neil Jessup when I went to Ultradent, I'm like, bro, your bond doesn't contain MDP, right? And it's like so strong. What's the deal? Because MDP actually has a chemical bond to not only collagen fibril itself, but to hydroxyapatite, as well as to non-precious metals, as well as to zirconia. You know, MDP is, like I say in some of my other lectures, remember that girl or that guy that rejected you in high school, right? Imagine their face. Yeah, that person, right? So imagine you were at assembly with them and you had MDP, you painted on your shoulder, and then like you press it up against them without them knowing, and you hit it with your velo, right? That asshole would still be with you right now, stuck to your arm. It's ridiculous, right? But actually, Neil Jessup opened my eyes and I was like, whoa, what's going on? Because what we did is we actually bonded to dentin discs. Dentin bonding, what you think is not very strong at all, both immediate bond strength and overnight. And I think my immediate bond strength was in excess of 50 megapascals. Overnight increased to over 65. I mean, I didn't win the top bond strength of the day, which I was gutted about because, you know, I'm very competitive by nature, as you know, but I couldn't believe it. And then he said to me, we have samples in solution in saline that have been cycled over 12 years. And we just separated one the other day and it's around the 80 megapascals level. So I was thinking to myself, on what level, even though our bonding protocols are amazing, we talked about micro air abrasion, then you're gonna put the etch on the enamel for 10 seconds, then you're gonna take your microbrush and splash it onto dentin for however long you want, 5-10 seconds, rinse it off 7 seconds with water. Make sure all that acidity is gone. You want to dry. I don't care if you over dry or not. Take your 2% chlorhexidine or gluma, scrub it in, scrub it in, scrub it in 30 seconds. Check your airline. Make sure there's no water contamination. Puff, puff, puff. As soon as it's perfectly moist dentin, scrub in your bond, which has been mixed like crazy and dispensed at the last minute, by the way. Don't have it dispensed at the beginning, you know, because that would have all evaporated and all the goodness is gone. So you want to make sure it's freshly mixed. And if you don't hear, like if I'm smashing my phone against it, that's the bottle. And the other way, I'll think something's wrong, right? Then you dispense it. Otherwise you're thinking, are you lazy? Shake it like a bartender. Shake it like you mean it, right? Whatever, I get really intense at work, but I don't actually yell at people. You can ask them anyway. I digress. What was I talking about? I said I wanted to make sure I answered the question, and so I did. But oh yeah, it's crazy. Anyways, the bond strengths were ridiculous. But I was like, even though our bonding protocols are amazing, like we can, okay, I don't know. And then like there's certain bonds that I use that I won't name that have like maybe 20 megapascals maximum bond strength. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I don't have any post-op sensitivity. It might have a function to do with how I'm layering or how I'm micro layering. But wouldn't I rather use a product that is like 60 plus megapascals shear bond strength on dentin, sustained over time? It's mental. It's a no-brainer. I mean, it's like for me, yeah. So peak universal bond is actually one of my favorite bonds in the whole world. Yeah.
And let me ask you a question related to that here, asking about, can you apply chlorhexidine before etch? Since you talked about peak, which is the one product in the market that already contains chlorhexidine, but if you were not using, or even if you do use peak, could you apply chlorhexidine before you etch?
Here's the thing. I'd never apply chlorhexidine before I etch, because etch is the thing that wakes up the MMPs. You want to wake up the MMPs and you want to put them to sleep. Research shows that the MMPs are actually put to sleep for the better part of a year, but hey, a year is better than no years, in my opinion. So, I mean, yeah, peak universal bond contains chlorhexidine, but what am I using chlorhex for? I'm using chlorhex to also re-wet my dentin after I air dried because I was careless, because who cares, right? You're going to apply chlorhexidine and then you're paying attention to puff drying. So I'm not rinsing off my chlorhexidine, I'm puff drying it. I'm puff drying my chlorhexidine and that stays on there. But this isn't Savicol. This isn't like 0.12% with essential oils for flavoring. This is 2% chlorhexidine that you use for endo, for example, a really pure chlorhexidine or gluma.
All right, thank you. It's still on the topic of bonding. What do you think about the use of liners? For instance, base, liner, Vitribond liner for deep restoration. Does that affect bond strength, longevity?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, Bertolotti and stuff, Bertolotti doesn't like the use of liners per se, and I've actually experimented with both. I don't use a GIC liner as a general rule. However, if I were to use a base, and if I were to use a GIC, I would use obviously dentin conditioner, and I would use Fuji 8. Fuji 8 is the world's only kind of like dual cured, resin modified, self-cure GIC, which I really, really think is a true base, because as you know, GIC has got exactly the same coefficient of thermal expansion as dentin. It's exactly the same. So, I mean, I really, really like it, but I like to use GICs in a closed sandwich situation, never in an open, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm always going to close it first and convert it to class 1 before using a GIC as a base. And the only base that I normally use, I don't use Vitribond, I don't use GC liner or Fuji liner, I don't use any of that. Obviously, if I'm close to the pulp or have an exposure, I use something like Theracal LC, or I'll use something similar, like Calcimol LC from Boco, for example. It's a light cured dical, let's just say. It's a calcium, it's a resin modified, so it's light curable calcium silicate. So that has excellent results. And obviously there's different things like Activa on the market by Pulp Dent, as well as, from Septidont, there's Biodentine and things like that people have tried. I just don't like the workflow with Biodentine, unfortunately, for myself. So in my hands, if I have to, I'm going to be using something small like a Theracal LC. And this will come at the point where if I'm microaerabrating, I'm going to microaerabrate everywhere, but I'm going to try to avoid spraying in that general vicinity of an exposure, obviously. I'm going to rinse out a lot, and now it's sopping wet. I'm going to take chlorhexidine. I'm just going to load my whole preparation like crazy for a minute. I'm just going to scrub it for a minute, right? Obviously, it shouldn't be bleeding. I'm just going to scrub it. If it's bleeding, it's hyperemic after 5 minutes. It obviously is hyperemic and it needs endo. And then I'm going to puff dry. And then I'm going to kind of use more of a selective etch technique on that area. So I'm not going to etch the exposure at all, or the dentin really around that. I'll be using more of a self-etch. So probably I will not be using a peak universal in that situation, because it's kind of a total etch. It's my go-to for total etch ultimate bond strength, but it doesn't really have MDP for chemical bonding to the hydroxyapatite and the collagen of deep dentin. things like that. You know what I mean? So I'm picky. I'll use an MDP bond for situations where I absolutely do not want to put etch on a certain part of dentin. You know, but otherwise I would use, you know, kind of a total etch technique. I really do like total etch. It's my guilty pleasure, but I try to minimize my etch time on dentin. Don't tell anybody.
So it'll be our secret and with our 120 colleagues here as well.
Fully, okay.
All right, some bulk fills are used in 4mm thickness. What is your opinion, please?
Don't like it. Okay, well, straight up. I mean, you can use it in 5. I mean, like my buddy Raimondo comes in from Cave O'Cur and he says to me, hey, check it out, sonic fill. I'm just like, okay, go for it, show me. And then he goes, look, I'm just gonna load it up, okay? Hit it with the light, check it out, feel it, rock hard. I'm like, that's really nice, that's good. But what is the microtensile shear bond strength of that relative to something where you layer it conservatively? And that's my problem. It's not so much that your composite's cured or not cured. It's what's the interface look like and how's that going to perform over time with thermal fatigue of the tooth. And if that interface isn't intact, you know, like I say, if your bond layer, when you cure it, it's not actually cured, you're hoping to God you either have like a really powerful light that actually gets all the way down there and the material that's super, super low shrinkage stress in order to establish that link to dentin. But I'm not the type of person that likes to risk that. You know, I'm a very OCD person in terms of dentistry, and I need to know that when I go home at nighttime, I can actually sleep well without actually worrying about interfaces and things. I want to make sure, I mean, like, to put it this way, you can be known as the dentist that other dentists send patients to you because they can't resolve any sensitivity, right? And your bonding protocol will solve all of that. Or you can be known as the dentist that just, like, you know, works super fast but has a greater rate of failures and things like that. You know, I treat dentists a lot in New Zealand, and a lot of them come to me and they say, I did this filling, I did this MOD in 15 minutes today with this bulk fill. It's awesome. I'm like, I've got a bulk fill. Do you want me to use that on? No. Do what you do. So it's very weird how it's like a double standard. Dentists want to do something for their patients, but in their own mouth, they won't actually have it. If I were to use a bulk fill, I like bulk fills. Don't get me wrong, because greater monomer conversion, great chameleon effect, low shrinkage stress. It's a super composite, isn't it? It's a super composite. It has all the attributes of a super composite. Just use it conservatively. Use it like you would a conventional composite, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It'll actually work to your advantage.
Yes, and again, you have to take into considerations light curing if you're going to be able to properly cure that composite all the way to the bottom of those 4mm. Even though, of course, it does have a different formulation, so it's not that dependent on it, but you still need the light to go all the way through it.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Let me go on here with the questions. So, how do you shape the marginal ridge? And there's one also about restoring here. I may squeeze that in as well. So how do you prepare or restore teeth so that you have enough space to include your anatomy and that it isn't lost after polish? So maybe those two questions have some in common.
Great question. So pretty much what you want to do is you want to mark your occlusion before you get started with your rubber dam. So you want to take your articulating paper and you want to get the patient to kind of chew on that, not just bite and grind, but chew, because chewing creates a different envelope of function than grinding. I mean, we as humans, if you try, you know, you say, Mr. Jones, let me check your bite. Can you bite together? Can you grind for me? Who does that in real life? You'd be arrested. You know what I mean? Like, normally when we chew, it's an out to in type of action as opposed to in to out. But we say, can you grind front, back, left, right, 45, 45, and stuff like that? It's kind of weird. Chewing on it sometimes creates different deflective patterns that you wouldn't otherwise see. And when you put your rubber dam on, you want to try to memorize those areas, take a photo of it before you start, and try to recreate those areas there. Typically, when you create adequate resistance form for your composite, that's about 1.5 to 2 millimeters deep. And with that, you'll be able to do anything. So remember, okay, so imagine you got a class 1 and it's really shallow and you're thinking, okay, I want to create anatomy. How do I do that? And stuff like that. You want to do a few micro layers first. So remember, at the base of whatever I'm layering, you've noticed on the bottom, there's always composite there. And that composite is never a one-shot, you know, like a one-shot increment. It's always made up of micro flowable layers of a low shrinkage stress composite, right? Whether it's like SDR, which is, got like a 1.6 megapascal shrinkage stress, or whether it's Majesty aesthetic flowable, or whether it's, permaflow, things like that. It's made of, so even if your lobes were somehow, you're having a bad day and that invagination or that cleavage wasn't fully there, it's going to leak to nowhere. It's going to leak to composite. Your dentin is suffocated. There's no way of it actually getting down to your dentin at all. So if you do 2 micro layers, you're at about 0.5 of a millimeter down, and then you still have maybe about a millimeter or so to layer. And it doesn't matter if it goes right down, because you're down to composite. Does that make sense? Like you're not, even if it's a really shallow cavity, you've already had a base on there. Even though your base is thin, you still have a great base on there. And now when you lobe, obviously that area is well sealed. So now you're just working on form. I hope that helps.
Thank you. All right, let's go real quick here back to bonding. So with the bonding protocol, do you not rinse the chlorhexidine after rubbing it with a microbrush for 30 seconds, just air drying, and then there's a follow-up by the same, I believe here. And why do you not water dry the chlorhexidine and only air dry? Not sure what that means.
Okay, so water dry, are you talking about like rinsing it off? Or
I would say washing it off is what I understand by it, probably, yes. So you just air dry rather than washing it away with water.
If you wash it off, you kind of stand the chance of possibly not having enough left in the tubules for it to work. It does not impede the bond strength and actually increases the bond strength, as we found in Peak Universal Bond. It has about 0.2% chlorhexidine actually in the formulation. So as a result, I use it, I dry it to the extent that I have moist dentin, but I don't go any drier than that. Yeah, any drier than that, you're in the same situation where you've got over-dried dentin collagen fibrils that aren't sticking up, but they're lying flat, and then you have less of a chance of getting your primer in there and establishing a solid hybrid layer.
All right, now a couple of very quick questions here on your preferences. So I had a couple of people asked, which microabrasion do you use, please?
I use a Prep Start by Danville Engineering. So if you look up Prep-Start, I can write that down actually. Let me just.
All right. And then which camera lens and flash set are you using, please?
I'm gonna type it. I'm just gonna. Okay. I would like to answer.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's on the.
I screwed it up.
How do you spell that again?
Okay. So Prep Start, as in I'm preparing something. So Prep-Start, like start to prep.
I'll start. Okay. There you go.
Prep Start by Danville Engineering. There's also Crystal Mark, which is really good, but it's a more old school looking machine.
Okay. So it's in the answer question section there. And then about your camera lens and flash set.
Okay. So I currently use the Nikon D750. It is a full frame lens, or a full frame camera. I use a 105 millimeter macro, which is the zoom lens. I use SBR 200s, which are the wireless slave flashes, and they come and you can clip them onto the lens if you wanted to, because it has a ring, or you can get a bracket. What I use is one by Photomed. Go to photomed.net. It's an American company, and they created a bracket that looks like the one that you've seen, obviously, that I use. If not, I can send you a photo afterwards. But it allows the flashes to kind of come out wide, and you can get like real interesting shots and angulations with your lighting. And that's my setup there. So I use it, I think, I'm not up with the play in terms of the newest release. It's 7200 or something, or Nikon 7300 or 7200 is inadequate. I think it's a crop sensor. It's an APS-C. It's a crop sensor, but that has excellent resolution and color accuracy for dentistry. So if you want to, like, my opinion, I think the D750 has got the perfect balance of, it's just great for dentistry. It's not the top of the line or anything like that, but it's a full frame, and it's fantastic. I don't have any problems with it at all, and it's gonna, if I was getting like kind of a third camera. That's what I would still get. You know, you could go to the D810, but the Nikon D810 is good for astrophotography. So unless you're like a nighttime nerd that likes looking at stars, you know, probably like you don't need that 165 million whatever pixels or whatever. I mean, like it's just like over the top. I think the D750 is a really nice balance for what you need in dentistry. Okay, Fabio, I think you muted yourself accidentally. Can you unmute yourself, please?
I did, yes. So I was going to say that we had a last question here before we just got a last minute another one, but this is second to last question by Dr. Lin. How to build a tooth up with a sectional matrix when the line angles are missing? For instance, a buccal or lingual cusp are gone. A cavity is now a large DOL or a DLBL filling, so the ring cannot be clamped to the tooth.
So I did this the other day on a few cases, actually, you guys would have seen. So obviously you try to get isolation first and you do the whole adhesive protocol that we talked about. And you would start off with a few layers of microflowable kind of on the bottom in the area that you're missing the cusp, and then you would slowly build it up. And then unfortunately, you would either freehand the missing cusp, or if you were fortunate enough to actually have gotten a preoperative impression or matrix, if let's just say there was caries and it was like a shell, but you still had the shell there and you captured that using either bite registration material or you had putty that you captured that with, you could bring that to the mouth after you finished your preparation and after your adhesive protocol, and then you can use a high strength injectable composite to very quickly recreate that wall, and you thicken it up. You want to make sure the base is at least 3 millimeters thick before you actually start loading it with your sectional matrix and the tension ring, because that could actually ping it off. Remember, when you build that up, it's not going to be perfect. So you can use your burrs and you can use your soft flex disc to kind of refine that. To remember, every step in restorative, you want to make sure that it looks exactly how you want it to look before you move to the next step. What does that mean? It means if I use a soft flex disc, what have I done? I've spurt oil all over my preparation, right? Which means that now I got to go back to etching. You don't have to micro aerobrade, but etch is kind of the, yeah, it's kind of like the detergent. It's kind of like the Windex in my big fat Greek wedding. It eliminates all sins, all right? So etching can eliminate oil contamination for about 10 seconds or so. You scrub it in, then you go straight to bond. No need to go to chlorhexidine because you've already bonded, right? Does that make sense? So if you're kind of like, you've already done your adhesive protocol, and then you're just building up that line angle, you're modifying it with your soft flex, you're like, oh, I contaminated it. Why don't you get your sectional matrix in place, then you want to etch, then you want to bond, air thin, cure, and then you're away to micro layering and building up your proximal wall, converting it to class 1 before layering on the occlusal.
Great, thank you. And the last question we have here, if you see a thin layer, if you use a thin layer of cured flowable resin before applying a larger increment of bulk fill, wouldn't that negate the hybrid layer stress issue?
Yes. Yes, it would. It'd be safer. It would be safer than going straight with the bulk fill from start. I would say yes. But I would say if you're careful, maybe do another few layers of microflowable before you use bulk. But that's what I would encourage. Definitely a few layers of microflowable on the bottom first, like 1/4 millimeter, 1/2 millimeter, right? And then use your bulk fill if you want to, no problem.
Excellent. All right, Dr. Tam, we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more to explore.
I think so.
We still have a large audience here with us, but what I would like to suggest, bear with us here for a moment. I'll put a poll here to ask you guys even a date, but I suggest we schedule another follow-up session to go deeper, to progress further on the topics. And we set that up for 1.5 hours. I think that's usually good, unless, again, I can ask you, I can set a follow-up question, but we need to register again.
Yeah.
What do you think, Clarence?
I agree.
Okay, so let's do this then. So we'll end this one here today, and we will schedule a follow-up session. I'm assuming this time worked for most of you, because we did have all of you, for most of you here for most of the time. So let's schedule that. We will send you follow-up emails from your registration email. And also, if you would like to send us your comments about suggestions for dates, you can use the email info, I-N-F-O, at A-N-Z or A-N-Z, if you're anywhere else except the US, at ultradent.com. And then I can use that as a reference as well. Actually, let me just run a quick poll here. Well, my suggestion would be a Wednesday at the same time, again, at 7 p.m. Sydney time, this time here, 9 p.m. for you. Would that work?
Sounds great.
Okay, so let's schedule that. We'll work. I'll talk to Dr. Tam here afterwards, and we'll see a date that will work. We already have something scheduled for next week with Dr. Omar Ikram. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do so. We're going to cover endodontics and ideal irrigation protocol, and then we will schedule a follow-up session. It's amazing to see the passion. Got a couple of comments on the passion as well about the topics, and I love the way you kept me on my toes here to keep it interactive with the polls, and we get a good participation from the answers as well.
Fabio, yeah, you did well. You did really well. You're a poll ninja. You're a poll ninja.
There you go. I well, me think about quitting my daytime job now. Clarence, thank you. Any final words before we let everyone go?
I just wish everyone had a good dinner, and this was entertaining but also informative, and obviously not a waste of your time. I certainly want to meet all of you guys and connect with you guys into the future. Any questions, hit me up on Facebook Messenger, DM me, and but besides that, I'm sure we'll bump into each other once this COVID thing is all over. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, because everyone, there's like a million webinars people can do these days, and I really appreciate that you chose to do this one, and you came all the way to Utah.
Yes, to join us. I second what you said. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, your active participation. Clarence wouldn't let us just sit there and watch, right? And thank you, and see you soon. We will do a follow-up session then. Clarence, thank you so much. This was amazing. I had not seen you speak before. I'm just baffled here. So fantastic. I love it. Looking forward to our next session.
Flattered. Have a good night, everyone. Drive safely. Sleep well.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.